Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and yeah, I'm starting this off with a screenshot I took of my back a couple weeks ago in the middle of some of my training because this topic has come up of mind-muscle connection in the back, and I actually have people saying things like, oh, you've got to retract your scapula, you need to be able to feel your back on your lat exercises, and this is complete bodybuilder nonsense, and I'm going to actually get into why. But I think it's important for me to always just kind of show my back first. And no, I don't think I have, from a bodybuilding perspective, because I'm not a bodybuilder, like a bodybuilder's physique. But arguably, I do have a tremendous amount of back development, and I have good friends who are bodybuilders who actually comment on it. I mean, like Nicola Ella, Devin Palumbo, these are people I know. They'll comment on it. They might come vouch in the comments and be like, you guys are silly if you say otherwise. But the point is, my back development is pretty tremendous. It is probably my most developed body part. Yet I always tell people I do not feel my back on a single lat exercise. And then when I say that, you get people who say, but you should. If you did this, you would get even better results. And that's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. I mean, it's kind of ironic that my most well-developed body part, I have zero mind-muscle connection with. What does that tell you about the mind-muscle connection? That maybe it doesn't matter that much? And I always tell people, pull-ups, I feel them in my delts, my biceps, my upper chest. I don't feel them in my lats, even from a dead hang and then going all the way up to the top, right? You guys watch how I perform them. I don't feel that in my back. Rows, and it doesn't matter whether it's the Pendlay rows the way I do, or whether it's a T-bar row, or even a machine row, I don't feel them in my lats. I don't feel lat pull-downs in my lats. And rows I feel in my biceps and forearms. That's where I feel them. And people will say, oh, well, that's again, you need to learn to squeeze. You're using too much weight. And it's like, in what world does anyone honestly believe that from a biomechanics perspective that using so much weight that other muscles get involved somehow reduces the load on the primary movers, the biggest muscles? All right, that's fantasy. That's not based upon reality, what really happens in the body. Again, we're going back to this weird concept that bodybuilders have. Right? And how could you possibly not use your lats? If you look at what's happening on any of those exercises, look at what the motion that's happening is. Just because it's not strict or because you don't have that contraction because you're using a really light weight that allows you to contract, can that possibly remove the lats? I mean, look at it biomechanically. Is it possible to remove the lats as a primary mover on a row or a pull-up? Can it even be done? No, it can't. You can't remove the lats. And people want to talk about the isometrics and everything. Well, you need that. Well, again, you're coming back to the point of when you look at all the data that's out there, what do we know about isometrics? Isometrics do not produce as good of hypertrophy as full range of motion or dynamic movements do, right? They produce some hypertrophy. It doesn't produce as much. So if they don't produce as much, why is anyone focusing on it? So essentially people are saying, oh, so that you will feel your lats more. Doesn't mean your lats will work harder. Let me put that in perspective. People are saying so that you will feel your lats, you should reduce the weight so that you can squeeze more during the isometric part. So you lose muscle fiber recruitment and you're going to work less total muscles. I mean, does anyone do pull-ups only for the lats? Does anyone do rows only for the lats? Does anyone do deadlifts only for the lats? I mean, let's assume that your goals are hypertrophy and not even a strength athlete. It's just purely hypertrophy. In what world do any of you live in where you don't want bigger biceps or bigger delts or bigger traps? I don't think that's a real issue. So that being said, why wouldn't you want to use all those muscles? And use me as the perfect example. I don't feel my lats. I feel those other muscles. You want to know why I probably feel them? Because they're slightly weaker for me. In other words, my back dominates. My back grows easy. So therefore, the muscles that are struggling the most are the ones that you feel, but it doesn't mean the lats aren't working. If you're moving a big heavy weight that involves the movement of the scapula, your lats are getting stimulated. So why does it matter if you don't feel them? If anything, it's an indication, I would say in my case, it's an indication that because my lats are more developed than the other muscles, that they're fine, that it doesn't matter, does it? I would suggest that the muscle that you feel the most, and I'm just going to go out on a limb with my own correlation in my own life, what I've experienced, I'm not saying this is true, that the muscles that you feel the most are probably your weakest muscles. They're your weak links in these exercises. But what people also need to remember is that just because a muscle is a weak link in an exercise doesn't mean the other muscles aren't getting stimulus. That if there's progressive overload there, everything involved is going to grow, but you will have muscles that are weaker. And it might be the reason for that is because the deadlift, and we have plenty of data showing this, the deadlift actually does work the lats, works the lats a lot. Maybe because I've done so much deadlifting all through my training career that it has given me lats that are disproportionate to those others. And so therefore, a lot of my lat development came from the deadlift. So therefore, my lats are my strongest body part on all these other movements, whereas in my biceps are a weaker link because I don't have the biggest arms. Like I think we'll all agree that while my back development is good, my biceps are not as developed as my torso is, right? Is anyone going to disagree with that? I'm not. So the point there is that maybe that's what it is. If anything, feeling a muscle is a bad sign, is a sign that's a possible weak link for you. That's just been my own personal experience. And let's come over to the point and talk about isometrics. People who are worried about a squeeze or isometric training, by contracting the scapula, I think it's only honestly bodybuilders who don't deadlift. Why? Because you will never get the isometric contraction on any of these muscles that you will get on a deadlift. In other words, when you set up the deadlift, what do? You pull your shoulder blades down and back, right? You're having to depress and retract the scapula. Well, let's say you're doing a 500-pound deadlift, and the most that you can row strict and retract the scapula is 185. Which one is going to have more isometric contraction when the scapula are squeezed? Because you're having to pull the deadlift off the floor with the scapula retracted, right? That's 500 pounds pulling your scapula apart versus 185 or 200 for the row that you're trying to squeeze together at the top. Which one is recruiting going to require far more work and muscle fiber recruitment in the scapula? Or during scapular retraction, during this isometric contraction that everyone's worried about? The deadlift. That's the point I made before for people talking about the stretches and isometrics when they were talking about the rack pulls. The rack pull doesn't bend you over as far as the deadlift. The conventional deadlift puts your torso in more of a position to where you have to hold scapular retraction far more difficultly. It becomes a non-factor on these really short rack pulls. But when you pull from the floor, that isometric strength there matters a lot. You develop that isometric strength for retracting the scapula to be able to pull any respectable weight on a deadlift. I would suggest to people that if you really and truly want that squeeze that you're worried about, you need to do more deadlifting, because it is a far, far more powerful tool for, again, retracting the scapula and squeezing them and holding them for a second or two under load than any lat exercise could ever be. Because you don't have to dynamically pull that weight into place first. It's already there. The others are there to spread the scapula. They're there to do different motions. So that's one of the things that I tell people. That's also one of the big factors in my back development. It's not just the pull-ups or the rows or any of that. My deadlifts have contributed. And so again, if we wanted to go around and say that contraction matters, and I don't think it's that important, to be honest, because I don't think it matters at all for these pulling exercises, for rows, for pull-ups or any of that, I think it's nonsense. I mean, look at all the data available. I mean, again, we could talk again about mind-muscle connection versus external cues, right? Lifting explosively, and the research there is overwhelmingly in favor of explosive movements. It is superior to the mind-muscle connection. See where I'm going with that? That squeeze and contraction and concentration is inferior to moving the weight as fast as possible with reasonably good form. Multiple studies have looked at that. This is not debated anymore. The evidence is pretty good the other direction. You be lifting explosively. If you do enough big, heavy, explosive movements, you're going to have a big back. All right, back is the easiest muscle to develop on a balanced program, muscle group in my experience. But if we go back to that point about that squeeze that people are worried about, the deadlift would destroy these other lifts and your ability to do that under load. If you're that worried about that squeeze that everyone seems to, all these bodybuilders obsess over, just do more deadlifting, problem solved. Then you don't have to worry about that silly shit on your pull-ups and chin-ups and rows. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.